Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and joining us for his go-around this time, State Representative Tony Cabral is joining us. Thanks for coming in again to do the show. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me again. I think it's always nice to have the opportunity to talk to you and talk to the viewers and the constituency that in New Bedford. It's always nice to do that.
We were talking off camera, and I'm just kind of curious as to how right now, as we're entering the fall season now, and we're 7 months probably into the pandemic, if I do my math correctly. Last time you were here, staff was out of the offices up there. As we talk now, what's the atmosphere like on Beacon Hill, just staff-wise and what have you? Well,
obviously we had to change, we have to adapt, right? The experience is different right now because of the pandemic. The State House is actually closed to the general public, so you don't have all that activity of people coming through, the general public coming through, school kids coming through, you name it, right?
Right.
That's all closed because there's no access except for those who might, like us, work in the building. But even then it's different because most folks are still working remotely. Most staff is working remotely. Every time we've had full formal sessions, then obviously some folks remain working and participating in the session remotely. Others are in person, like I've done in person back in July several times in person. I usually go up whenever I need to go up into the office as well. But the staff is primarily remote, for the exception of some staff that you might need, like some staff of the Speaker's office or some staff from Ways and Means, because they do a lot of work behind the scenes as well. But so that has changed. But the work goes on. The interactions go on. Obviously, they are different than if it's in person.
And the dynamic about the State House is that it's so personable. I mean, your representatives are meeting with each other. Representatives are meeting with senators. You're meeting with the commissioners, department heads. Those interactions, I've seen a lot of things happen just by the face-to-face meetings that take place. Do you find that things are slower because there's no interaction? And just the public coming in too. I know that people go into your office just to say hi at some point, some cases too. Does the lack of interaction slow down government in a sense? I don't think it has slowed down the government per se. I think we all miss those kinds of interactions. Those are important. That personal, in-person contact and exchange. That's important. At the State House, and for those of us, whenever it's very different trying to meet someone and have a discussion by phone or even by Zoom than in person. Right.
Obviously, in person is a whole different experience. The body language is important, right? And all of that. So all of that has been changed temporarily. Hopefully, we can win this battle and with the pandemic, and we return to what's called the new normal, if you will. But the business goes on. We've done, actually, the legislature, we've been very productive. We've done a lot of debating around major issues from early voting, from voting by mail, various ways of assisting small businesses, how they can reopen. All those things have been debated in past. We have about 4 or 5 pieces of legislation that we did just prior to the pandemic. Those are still under. Some of it was prior, like the transportation bill, the transportation bond bill. We did a piece of that. We did the so-called Chapter 90, which is the money It goes to local communities for roads and for roads and sidewalks and so forth. The major piece of the transportation is still in conference committee.
Right.
And others that we've done. We did in July quite a number of issues around police reform and other things. Those that remain on conference committee. Hopefully they will come back sometime in the next few weeks, so we can actually pass that legislation. And now we are preparing for the budget, finally, right?
Well, just for people to understand too, usually the session ends and the budget is theoretically in place by July 1st. The fiscal year starts July 1st. How has the timetable changed with the pandemic? Because at this point in time, it'd be informal session right now. So how is the calendar, if you will, switched for the legislature?
Well, the calendar actually, as you know, this is election year, right? And July 31st is usually, according to the rules, the last day of full formal session.
Correct. Yep.
And the legislature stays informal for the rest of that year.
Mm-hmm.
We changed those rules. We had to change them. We changed them temporarily to allow full formal sessions all the way until the first of the year.
Okay.
Which is when the session technically
the new session would begin.
The new session would begin.
Correct.
So in that sense, I think it was good to actually be able to, because those rules are rules that we write and establish, and I think we should change them. We did. I mean, from day one.
You'd still be able to, obviously you've got to work, and we'll talk about the budget, but you've got the budget still, so you can still do full formal at that point.
Yes.
But any piece of legislation that the legislature deems necessary to get out, it would be a full formal session right now. It wouldn't be informal.
Most of I would say, potentially controversial bills or bills that require, there are bills that require roll call, such as the transportation bond bill, for example. That's constitutionally, you have to have a roll call, so you can't do those on informal sessions. In that sense, the opportunity to be able to change the rules like we did this year really did a great. It's great for the issues that remain on the table to be decided. Otherwise, it would not be a good thing if we would not be able to legislate all the way until the end of the year in a full formal if we need to, including the budget. The budget has to be also a roll call.
Yep.
So I'm glad that we were able to make that alteration for this particular session. I think we have many things still on the table to resolve, but we have a few months to get that done.
The budget, obviously, probably the biggest thing right now, and I know obviously a lot of it was determined by perhaps what the federal government will do. Recently, obviously, it doesn't look like there'll be any agreement anytime soon. How long can you wait to do a formal budget? I know that you're doing the 1/12 budget, you're doing it temporarily, but at some point, I guess legally, does the legislature have to pass a full budget for the year?
Eventually you have to.
Yeah.
You have to pass a full budget, or an official full budget for the year. Has to be a balanced budget. Again, we cannot, this is not the federal government, it's not Congress. The state legislature has to pass a balanced budget. But quite frankly, by waiting a little longer like we have, because we have the opportunity to do a full formal for that particular, for the budget itself and other issues, we gave us an opportunity to look at the revenues a little closer. Obviously, the revenues have changed substantially with what has come in. Right now, the latest numbers that have come out actually are a little bit better than they were, let's say, back in July and August. The predictions back in August, for example, was that we potentially would have a shortfall of $5 to $8 billion for FY 2021.
Correct.
Right? The latest numbers, the range is also big, but the range now, the prediction is between 3 and 5 rather than 5 and 8, right?
Right. I've seen. Yeah, I saw that in the paper. As a matter of fact, today they called $5 billion as the max right now.
So that's positive, in a way, compared to the previous numbers, and that's because we've had the opportunity to wait and see what the numbers are going to be based on the reopening of the economy that we're going through right now. So the light is a little bright at the end of the tunnel in that sense. we're still going to have, without federal aid, which at this point doesn't seem to be coming anytime soon, if we don't have at least an understanding of what that aid could be, what amount that could be, then it's going to be a tough budget. It's going to be a tough budget.
Could there be then, at what point, if the federal government punts and doesn't do an agreement, I guess until next year, well, who knows what happens with the election, but until next year perhaps, at what point in time does the legislature and the governor and everybody say, okay, we got to make these decisions now because we can't wait anymore?
Well, we're going to make that decision in the next month or so,
okay.
I believe. I think there are a number. We have a rainy day fund, a healthy rainy day fund. Obviously, we cannot use that whole rainy day fund for one fiscal year.
Right.
Right?
Because
right
next
now,
year is this
potentially
revenue, right.
similar
Yep.
situation, and they're talking about potentially 2023 as well could be additional challenges in trying to budget, in trying to balance the budget. But we have two items that I think are very important for our communities that we represent and for our constituents, and that's local aid, unrestricted local aid, and Chapter 70. So aid for schools, for public schools.
But I thought my understanding was that the state right now is for the Chapter 70 money. It's based on last year as well.
It's based on last year with inflation, plus
Okay.
inflation.
Okay.
So it is level funded, but at the same time it's not, because we are projecting $107 million more than last year
Okay.
to factor in inflation.
Yep.
And at the same time trying to factor in, not in total, but factor in some of the aspects of the Student Opportunity Act that we passed that is crucial for New Bedford, that would bring, tremendous amounts of revenue for the school department in order for us to really provide the kind of education that wealthier communities can right now, and we can't. So that's still a priority for all of us. It is a priority for me. I was very much involved in that whole debate. I know how important education is, how important funding for education is, and that we all get treated equally and fairly. And I think we are on target on that one. It's not going to be what we thought it was going to be, but it's not going to be as bad as we thought.
Right,
either,
I was
so.
going to say, I mean, you had passed, not you, but the body had passed a sweeping education reform
Yes.
bill, and this was supposed to be the big first year, and obviously that
Well, that has to
can't
be
happen.
pared back a little bit,
yeah,
and we all understand that.
right.
But the goal remains the same. And as the economy improves, then we can restore some of those revenues that right now the state would not be able to, due to the fiscal situation. But the commitment is there, the goal is still there, and we're going to work very hard to get back on track, if you will, on that particular issue.
Do you see the state, the legislature, you folks having to make cuts at some point, just in general in services?
It's always tough to make cuts, right?
Yeah.
But I think we might have to in some areas. We don't know what those areas would be. Obviously, Chapter 70, we already said what we're going to do.
Level fund, yep.
Level fund
With the
plus inflation.
yep.
Local aid, the same thing. The unrestricted local aid, we said at least the same amount as 2020. And that's great. I mean, that's really great. It would be better if we were in a different situation, because it would be an increase in that area as well of unrestricted local aid, because that's money that the cities and towns get with no strings attached, right? They can use it as they see fit at the local level.
Right.
And for many communities, including New Bedford, for the city of New Bedford, that's an important pot of money. So we've been working very hard to try to increase that pot of money. Also, how that money gets distributed, the formula that is used, still is not completely the way it should be, but I think eventually we'll have a better formula that will benefit cities like New Bedford.
Here we are talking with State Representative Tony Cabral on the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall, talking about the budget. as I was reading the paper, I know the governor had said that taxes right now are off the table right now, increasing taxes. I know you and I had talked before about, for example, the gas tax. Somebody from New Bedford, that would really whack them more than somebody from Boston,
Right.
what have you. I see the MBTA is looking at cuts, potential cuts.
Right.
Those are all things, obviously, when you talk the gas tax, you talk about the MBTA, that your constituents, that our neighbors really rely on, really.
Right.
Those kind of services. And I'm wondering, too, with healthcare or mass health, and especially the things that are needed right now during the pandemic. You mentioned briefly business aid.
Right.
The pot seems to be just getting filled up, and
That's right.
the
It's
need
gonna
is
be-
greater than what really
Yeah.
the state can afford.
There are going to be some tough decisions to be made in this particular fiscal year, 2021. But I think all of those areas that you talked about, those are very important areas for us to really carefully appropriate the money that we think it's important to appropriate, right? We have to dip into the rainy day fund. Right now, the rainy day fund is $3.5 billion. I'm glad we are right now in that position, because many states don't have that,
Right.
So they are in a worse condition than we are. So healthcare is an important commitment that we've made, and I think you're not going to see any major cuts there. I mean, you're not going to see it. Probably, I don't see many cuts in the area of healthcare. I don't see cuts in the area of education, for example, and local aid, unrestricted local aid. MBTA, yeah, maybe they might need some to be cut. Also, their services have been cut back. The good thing in terms of the MBTA is South Coast Rail is on track, if I may use that term.
Mm-hmm.
The work is moving forward. That's obviously not from the operating budget, as you all know. This is from the capital budget, which is a whole different process of appropriating the money. We have to go to the market, sell bonds to get the money for that kind of investment. So right now, that's not going to be impacted either. So we're still planning to have the first train down here by the end of 2023, and that's still the plan. That's still what we're pushing for. That's still what we're working for.
Right. Talk to me about your chairmanship. You're sort of a long-range sort of guy with your chairmanship. You're dealing with projects that are spread out over a long period of time. Does this pandemic hinder the ability for the state to think long-term? I mean, I think the last time you were talking about a lot of projects that
Right.
5, 6, 7 years down the road that you could pass it now, but you won't see it for that long a time. Has that all changed with regards to your committee?
No, not all of that has changed. The way we do the capital budget and the way we plan long-term for capital projects such as South Coast Rail is different than the operating budget. The operating budget is from year to year, and the needs can shift. And in Wall Street, obviously, the rating agencies look for how you handle your operating budget and how you handle the rainy day fund, and the ability to pay back
Right. Well, that's the big-
over
yeah.
10, 20, 30 years. Usually a lot of the bonds that we issue to get the money for those projects are either 20 or 30 year
Bond.
bonds.
Yep.
Right? The bond market right now is fairly good. I think it's relatively inexpensive to issue bonds, to go to the market. So I think we do it carefully, but I think we are in a good situation to continue planning long term.
Do you have to scale back the number of those projects?
Right now,
And
there
I'm
are
not talking any specifics,
Right.
but I'm just saying, like I said, I remember the last time you were talking about a number of projects, but without being specific, but do you have to scale the number of those projects down, not just in New Bedford, but across the whole state?
Well, we need to see what the rainy day fund is going to do, what we're going to do with the rainy day fund, how much of it we need to use or not use, because that also has an impact on the bond ratings for the state. and of course the ability to provide the money to pay for those, right? Some of those bonds are not so much tied to those numbers of the rainy day fund and the operating budget. They tied to the kinds of revenues that we use to pay those bonds. For example, in the area of transportation, right? We have the transportation fund that many things, for example, when you register your car, when you renew your license, a lot of those fees, some of that goes to that fund. Those will be going on still. Some of the gas tax, all the gas tax actually goes to that fund as well. So there are specific revenue streams. They go to specific funds that signals to Wall Street and to the rating agencies that this part of the budget, the capital budget, is being managed very carefully, and there are revenues specifically set aside for those particular kinds of projects. So depending where the money is coming from in terms of the various funds, some of them we might need to postpone some of those projects, because what we do is it's really a 5-year capital plan, right?
Yep.
And that gets adjusted every year. So annually it gets adjusted, it gets published and issued and communicated to the various projects that are online to be used. So,
but as you talked about South Coast Rail, I didn't mean to interrupt, but as you talk about South Coast Rail, the projects that have already been, for lack of a better word, approved, those don't stop now.
Those don't stop now.
So
Those don't stop now.
anything that
They've been
you've
approved. Some of and the money then gets appropriated through bonds, obviously, on an annual basis. But the plan is a 5-year plan for most projects, right? Depending on the size of the project, obviously. In this case, South Coast Rail has another 2 fiscal years besides this one, right? In terms of capital planning for the project. That's in place, and that's right now part of the plan, and we don't expect that to change.
A couple of things I just want to talk. I know we've got a little bit of time left. You talked about elections, security of elections. As we go into this election, the general election, how comfortable are you? The state has done everything it can. The elections are safe, secure. People are going to be fine, whether they vote by mail or
Yes,
in
I think
person.
people will be fine. I think we created the opportunity for people to vote in three different ways, right? You can vote by mail. You can vote. We designated an early voting period of 14 days, so we'll begin October 17th, that particular period, and then of course election day itself. And I think what's important here to emphasize is election day is very important, and the election day needs to be planned, and it is always planned. It's not a last minute kind of thing that you make decisions, right? So we've put in place the mechanism, and then it's up for the local election officials in collaboration with the Secretary of State, and in terms of security is the full responsibility, always been, it will always remain that way, is the local police department provides the security and the protection and the integrity of the ballot box, right? As we all know, when we go on election day and vote, there's always a policeman or a policewoman at that site. That's the way it's going to be, and that's the way it is, right? That's part of our election laws. They've been on the books for many, many years. We've changed those to allow voting by mail, allow early periods of depending how long, if it's at the primary or the finals, and of course, election day itself. I think we need to make sure that everything is planned, because by the way, those not only the poll workers, but the police folks who work that day, they also get trained about how election day is, what to expect,
Right.
what's to prepare for. The poll workers get trained, the policemen get trained. So anything else, let's say if we were to need more security, if we wanted to, has to be planned. It can't be a last minute somebody on their own making a decision, oh, we're going to show up at the polls and provide protection. That's not the way it is.
But
in
you're comfortable.
Massachusetts.
You're comfortable.
But I think I'm comfortable. I
Yeah.
think I have tremendous respect for the local police department and for the local election officials and all the folks who work on election day, all the poll workers. I mean, they do fantastic work in New Bedford, as it is the case across the state. So I'm very confident it's going to be okay, and I think we all need to sort of, and that's what we should expect, right?
The other thing that I wanted to touch on briefly, and I know the budget dominated a lot of our conversation, but you mentioned police reform. I know the Senate has a bill, the House has a bill, conference committee. Just your thoughts, I guess, on the issue, which has really dominated a lot of the summer months here across the country.
Well, there are two versions of the so-called reform. The Senate, as you mentioned, and the House. There are slight differences in some areas. One of the big areas that people keep talking about is so-called qualified immunity.
Right.
That is different from the House and the Senate. But I think that can be worked out. I think what's important here is not, at least the way I look at it, this is about making our local police or the state police or environmental police, but in particular those who police our streets every day, to make them a better force, to get trained better, to handle situations differently. This is not about not thinking that the police department or the police force or the police officers are not important. Of course they are very important. I've always been very supportive of the police force. I will continue being so, but I think it's important also for us to step back, and that's what we did, step back and see what can we do better and how can we hold people accountable. I think it's important to hold people accountable, just like my constituents, right? They expect me to go up there and fight on their behalf, and that's what I try to do every day. So I think be in the public sector, be in the private sector, accountability is important. And in order to make that happen, you got to have a process in place, right?
Is it necessarily a community thing, or should be a state thing? In other words, should it be a blanket thing by the state, or should each community have their own plan?
No, I think it should be, there are some standards, ought to be standards. Okay. It should be statewide standards, and that's part of the reform. The training will be also standard. There will be, hopefully we'll have an academy as well in Southeastern Mass. That's part of the capital plan of having established one. Right now, most of our folks, let's say from New Bedford, Fall River, they have to go sometimes Plymouth, across the state, someplace else, in Western Mass or other places. Yep. So we want to have one down this way. It's being planned as part of the capital plan. It's going to get built probably around the Bridgewater, using some of the state land and state facilities that presently exist there. So I think you need the standards, statewide standards of accountability, statewide standards of training, and how you handle your job, and how you deal with the general public, right? I mean, it's not an easy job. It's a tough job.
It's changed a lot over the years, too.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. It's almost like the teacher's job has changed a lot. You're no longer just there to teach. You are a social worker, you are a psychologist, you are somebody who tried to help not only the kids but the families, look at the whole thing in a holistic way, right? Yeah. And the police job also has changed a lot that way too. Around domestic violence, for example, they have a big role when it comes to that, and by and large they've done a good job on that. And years ago, they didn't think it was part of their job, right? It is, and many other issues. I mean, so it's not an easy job. We need to support them, but also it's important to have standards and accountability.
It's good seeing you. Time's gone by quick. I appreciate you coming in, though.
Thank you very much for inviting me again.
We will talk to you again very soon.
I hope so.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.